not the same division, but the whole, just like we do with our technology in Boston, we bring guys to handle their command problems, but it's not space, there's a lot of other resources. This is a space.
Hey, good afternoon. Hey, my name is Joe Hartman. I'm from Army Cyber Command, and I'm here with a panelist from the Defense, group of panelists from the Defense Digital Service. Really appreciate everybody being here today to listen to this panel. Hey, I'm the Deputy Commander of our Army Joint Force Headquarters at Fort Gordon, Georgia. I have responsibility for leading a number of cyber teams that support global operations in support of both Cybercom and Geographic Combatant Command. Over the last number of years, Army Cyber has been partnered with DDS and other organizations, to really build the type of innovative leaders and force that we need moving forward. I've been in Army Cyber now for about 5 years. I've had a lot of different jobs, from working on the Army network to supporting defensive operations, offensive operations, and this partnership has always been invaluable to me as a leader and to the organizations that I've been a part of. Whether we're talking about acquisition, talent, operations, technology, capability development, we've done a lot of, we Army Cyber have done a lot of interesting things working with some of the smart people that we have up here. And I'm interested in you hearing about what they've done and what they're continuing to do and to make us a better Army and to be able to better defend our country. I'm proud to be here with the backdrop of the steps the Army's taken to stand up our Futures Command. By their own words, Futures Command will break free of the antiquated industrial age business model and move at the speed of the information age. We like to think that we have done some of that in Army Cyber, and we'll talk about that today. But again, I think the stand-up of Army Futures Command is critical to our ability to do that as an Army, at the speed required moving forward. The team that I lead at Army Cyber is made up of computer programmers, electrical engineers, network experts, and designers of unique and complex operations in cyberspace. That includes civilians, that includes military members, and it includes partnerships across government, across private industry, across academia, and honestly includes a number of our international partners. And I feel very privileged to have been able to do that. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to make sure that you kind of understand my relationship with the panelists, okay? They asked that I wear a hoodie today. I told them that unfortunately I was unable to do that. No less than 2 of them texted me repeatedly and reminded me that the time was going to change. Okay, and then I needed to make sure that I understood that, so I was actually here on time, and that I didn't oversleep. Okay, which, believe it or not, I often do not sleep past noon. Although I have a couple high school kids that do. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our highly qualified panelists today, or let them introduce themselves. Nicole?
Thank you. My name is Nicole Camarillo. I work for Army Cyber Command. I develop talent management strategies, which is really a very generic way of saying that I'm working on creating a culture shift within Army culture, but more broadly military culture, to better leverage the technical talent that we have in uniform and maximize their skills and create a path forward for them as military members. The program that I'm doing this under is called Jin, which may or may not be related to Jin Erso from Rogue One, which is my favorite Star Wars movie. We can debate that after the panel. But basically, I am a lawyer by training. I fell into this based on my interest in privacy law and cybersecurity, and it has been one of the most impactful things I have ever done in my career, and we'll go more into that later on.
My name is Patrick Stoddard. I lead a group called the Army Digital Service. We're part of the Defense Digital Service, reporting directly to the Secretary of Defense. We work on high-impact problem sets affecting the entire Department of Defense and all military branches, with high focus being on the Army. Before this crazy sort of job that I find myself in now, I was actually a serial entrepreneur, so started several different tech companies, Spent plenty of time at South by Southwest in the past, so this is sort of a familiar home for me. And what we do every day at Army Digital Service and at Defense Digital Service is bring that sort of startup culture and that ethos to the world's largest bureaucracy.
Hi, my name is Claire Karoma, and I am a bureaucracy hacker on the Defense Digital Service team. So what that means is I leverage my tech background, policy knowledge, knowledge of procurement and budget processes in the federal government to ensure that our team has the ability to move nimbly, quickly, and get the job done. Most of my work is building relationships and finding places where the policies or the existing status quo procedures don't make sense and block our team from moving quickly, and I get rid of those. In a past life, I also was an entrepreneur. I owned my own design firm. I started out my career as a designer and a coder and a web developer, and began leveraging that talent to help manage up and build projects and products. So I use that talent here on the Defense Digital Service to help our team with the Army Digital Service as well as across the entire portfolio of our team.
Great, panelists, thank you very much. And again, thanks to everybody for being here today. So I'm going to moderate the panel, so I'll ask a series of questions. We'll have our experts provide answers, and then at some point we'll start taking answers from the audience here. The first question that we wanted to answer is, the mission of national defense is highly technical, and maintaining a technical edge is more important than ever. Can you discuss the role of technical talent in remaining competitive and furthering the mission of national defense? And I'd like to go to Nicole first, and then Claire.
Sure. So I think one of the best ways to look at the landscape now is our military advantage was always defined by having more of everything, right? More tanks, more planes, more ships, more people. And today, that is completely different. Most all of our weapon systems are completely software dependent. So it has become now more, do we have a technological advantage in the battle space? And now it's no longer numbers. We're traditionally, over the past 200 years, have been very focused on how many people we have. And now we need fewer people in this arena that are actually highly, highly technical to come in and solve some of these problems and to give us an advantage. And so we went to Facebook, and one of their engineers said the reason that we're so successful is because we have an engineer-centric culture. Whatever the engineers need, the engineers get, and we're all here to support them. And I think that's the shift that we're starting to see in terms of a certain part of how we maintain an advantage or develop a greater advantage against our adversaries, is that we start focusing on the technical talent and prioritizing them being resourced, which is part of what all of us up here are doing currently.
Yeah, specifically for the DDS model, that sort of speaks to that, right? So our model is that we find highly technical talent over a range of specialties. So we always look for highly talented designers, so we care about the experience when we're in the product management and the policy side. To Nicole's point, we are a small, nimble team. We have about 25 people on our staff at any given time, but we're highly effective because all of those people are extremely talented in what they do. They have the ability to be very efficient. And so that is the model that we take and we bring into our partnership arrangement with the Army, where we help them recognize how to find that talent, how to identify, and then how to empower that talent to get work done quickly.
Thank you. The next question is, DDS has been in operation for several years now, and some of the private sector, and this wasn't my word, but nerds, that have done tours in the Pentagon have rotated back to a corporate environment. What lessons do you think they bring with them from their time working with the military? Nicole?
So this is a subject that's near and dear for me because I spend a lot of time out in the Bay Area, specifically at Stanford, talking to students about our mission and the work that we're doing, and discovered that not many people are talking to them about how important their skill sets are to national security and what the opportunities to do that are. And I think what's happening now with people who come through DDS, they do their tours of duty, which are 1 to 2 years, and they go back. And the most critical thing for them to share is what it means to work on this mission set. I think on the left coast, there are a lot of assumptions about what this mission is, what it requires, and what the work we're doing means. We get to work side by side with people in uniform who have to go out and risk their lives all the time. There's a woman who used to be a pilot in the Marines who now works for Microsoft, and she said something that will stick with me always. She said, whether they're prepared or not, they will still have to go do their job to defend the nation. So to me, I feel like there is a huge conversation that needs to happen, not so much highlighting the divide between Silicon Valley and DoD or the federal government more broadly, but how are we going to bridge that gap? When our adversaries, namely Russia and China, their brain trust, they don't have a choice. They have to support their military and their defense efforts, right? They don't even get to choose. So for us, I feel it's very important for us to convey what it has meant for us to build a technology that will prevent grenades from being dropped on warfighters from a drone, right? My first team, they reverse engineered that process so that we could do that. And they had a prototype in 8 weeks. We now have an actual bespoke hardware and software capability that soldiers built for soldiers. And we can say that the work we're doing is actually saving their lives, making them safer out there, and also making the people in those areas safer too. So I think what it's going to take is we need to create more opportunities for the private sector like DDS to get involved in this mission, and we also have to do a better job sharing our mission with the people that we need to show up.
Thanks. Can I give a little context to kind of what DDS is? I realize we probably haven't given much background on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we've referenced the private sector a couple times, and that's my background and Claire's background as well on DDS. But a little about us. So our team exists solely for the purpose of recruiting people, technical people, talented people, in from the private sector for short-term tours of duty to work as part of the federal government. We are the team at the Defense Department, but we have similar teams at different agencies throughout government as well. There's a team at the VA, at DHS, at HHS, and others, because it turns out that there aren't actually a lot of good technical people left inside the government. The government has a tendency to contract these things out, as some of you may know. It has a tendency to want to buy things off the shelf, but in reality, the government, and especially the DoD, operate one of the most highly technical mission sets in the world, and it is critical that we have technical people at the point where decisions are being made. They're actually at the table with senior leaders, informing these really, frankly, life or death decisions, and that's really what Nicole was alluding to there, especially with the counter UAS project, the counter drone project, to help protect our soldiers in the field from having grenades dropped on them, right? This stuff is incredibly important, and we don't have enough technical people at the table when those decisions are being made. And so the mission of DDS is to offer a framework by which folks like you all, frankly, folks in the private sector, who perhaps never considered a career in government, I would count myself in that group. I didn't know anything about the military before I joined this job. I knew the stars were important, but that's about it. And you can come in and you can actually apply those same skills that you learned at a startup or at a large tech company to one of the most important mission sets that this country has.
And I want to just add, it's not just technical positions either. I'm a lawyer. I have been mostly public interest my entire career, and we get to be at the table when they're making decisions about policies. We get to talk to staffers on the Hill who are writing the laws to make sure that there's a voice in there and it's balanced, right? If we don't show up, then it's going to seem very one-sided, and we can't really, I don't see us having the right to complain if we're not showing up to influence those outcomes.
I think one of the other important things to note is that the technical talent that is in the government needs support from folks who can help them box out, right? Get out of the box that they've been put in. And so that's one of the beauties of the relationship that our team has when we go into our projects. So Nicole mentioned the soldiers on the GEN project who were able to reverse engineer technology, build a prototype to solve a problem that big industry had not managed to do after lots of money had been spent in 8 weeks. Part of why that worked is because we paired them side by side with our team. So they had access to user research designers to help them figure out how to actually identify what the needs of the user were. They had access to engineers who had varying different abilities that can help them kind of hone their talents and use it to build or to reverse engineer this technology. I think the other thing that's important to note is that as private industry, you don't think about coming into an organization like the Defense Digital Service as a tour of duty or a service, and it really is that, right? Many of us, as Patrick said, like our longevity is supposed to be 2 years. Sometimes we broker to deal with someone, come for 6 months, because people are obviously hesitant. And what we found is that once people come, the mission is so compelling and it's so important that people don't leave, they stay. Our director, Chris Lynch, often, his sell is really interesting. His sell is, this will be the best first job you ever had. He's very honest about it. And the reason why is because when you come from private industry and you're accustomed to moving nimbly, you spend a lot of time fighting battles. But at the end of that battle, the when matters. The things that we do, they matter, and they're lasting impacts that after we finish our tour of duty will continue to be beneficial to the mission of the Army and to the Department of Defense in defending our country.
Thanks, Claire. Hey, so I think that's a great lead into the next question. And Patrick, this is a question for you. So part of the divide between traditional military culture and startup culture is really, as you know, about process and when to bypass it. And I see Chris back there. He's very good at that.
Yes, he is.
You know, what can the Army learn from startup and entrepreneurial cultural as it adapts for the future? And then what can the tech industry learn about how the Army does business today?
So we've touched on this, right, this divide that exists culturally between the military, the federal government, and the tech sector. There's so much in reality that both sides can learn from each other. And it is so important that they come together, that people show up and actually contribute to this mission and try to understand why it's important. You know, the jarring thing, and I think a lot of the spirit of what Chris says in his recruiting pitch, which is that it's the best, worst job you'll ever have, is that every single day you will be banging your head against the wall trying to understand why there's so much process and so much red tape around things. And a lot of our job, you know, Claire introduced herself as a bureaucracy hacker. That's kind of an unusual title. The reason we have people like Claire on our team is so that they can understand and they can build out tools that we can use to navigate that bureaucracy and that red tape. And it's really important that we have people who have the sort of perseverance to put up with that. And we have, you know, everything from you know, following the process to trying to re-engineer the process, whatever it may be, to we have a unique ability on our team to actually waive the process or waive the policy. And all of those things are really important, but the lesson that we're trying to teach the commands, the agencies that we work with, and ultimately the Army and the DoD as a whole, is that we need to be more nimble, and we need to think of risk differently. So, you know, I hear a lot about risk management, for example, especially as we talk about software. You know, we'll have somebody who's a very senior leader, let's say they're a 2 or a 3-star general. And they've been tasked with making an assessment of the level of risk involved with deploying a new software application, right? So how do you think they might go about doing that? That person, that 2 or 3-star general, by virtue of being in that position, is not always technical and is often not technical. And so they have technical advisors around them, right? Not always. And it turns out that what they've built, in this example, is something called the risk management framework. And so what they do is they say, oh, we're going to mitigate all of the risk here. And we're going to do that by giving you a list of 2,000 controls. These are everything from your password must be 15 characters and include, you know, these special characters to you know, how you configure the networking for your on-premise environment, because of course that's what we like at DoD. And you go down and you write a justification for all of these things. Think about how long that takes. You have 2,000 controls to go through. It often takes 9 months to a year just to get new software approved for use on a network. That's a glacial pace. That's ridiculous, right? And a lot of the reason for that is because the people who are in positions of leadership are not always as technical as we need them to be, or they don't surround themselves with technical advisors to the extent that that they need to. And that's a lot of the mission and the role of DDS, is to be that technical voice at the table, to understand when decisions are being made and to provide sound technical advice without requiring us to jump through 2,000 different technical controls where we document our security practices. And so, we have a saying on the team, right, that we've mitigated all the risk at the expense of any forward progress. And that is really, frankly, how we need to think of this. We need to think about it, and a lot of what we spend our time doing on the team is advocating for what is the risk to the mission if we don't do this, right? Not what is the risk if we don't understand the nuance of this cybersecurity component, but what is the risk to the mission if we don't press on and try something new, whether it's a new staffing model, a new hiring model, with all the great talent management things that our team is doing, or whether it's new software, commercial software. We advocate for a lot of that. So there's a lot that I think the government and the Army can really learn from how we do things in a startup, and how we understand in a very in a very immediate sense the risk to the business of not moving forward. And then on the other side, I think that the startup community and the tech sector can learn a lot from the mission that the DoD has. It is, as we've mentioned, it is much wider ranging than you might think. And I think a lot of people, by virtue of being at the table, you sort of understand a lot more of the struggles that our service members go through and the challenges that they have to deal with. And the sort of challenge of operating an enterprise at a global scale that the Army very much is, a global and distributed scale. So there's a lot on both sides that I think can be learned, and that's a lot of what we're doing with Army Digital Service.
Thanks, Patrick. Look, I want to first of all thank you for keeping those observations at the 2 and 3 stars.
Yeah, no, of course.
Never
the ones.
we have some stars here very effective too.
So anyway, so I appreciate that. Good answer. Hey, so the next question is really for Claire then Nicole, and it's probably my favorite question of the day, and that's what happens when you take men and women in uniform and put them to work in startup-like spaces. What's the role of the environment in the work that they do? And while the question didn't ask it, I do think, if we can talk about some results there, I think it will be helpful.
Sure. So the GEN program, we started with one team. We said, let us have a few of the most highly technical individuals that we have in uniform. We're going to pair them with product managers, designers, and senior level engineers from DDS. And we're going to create an incubator-like environment. And we're going to let them run at this problem, which is the problem we were discussing, the counter-UAS, counter-drone challenge. And so that was just a thought experiment, right? We wanted to prove that if we change the culture and the environment that they're working in, that we give them a computer the first day they start working, we make it possible, Claire made this possible, for them to order on Amazon and get shipping in 2 days, and then actually have it delivered to the Pentagon, which you all might think is not a big deal, but people don't ever deliver food or flowers to the Pentagon because they will be moldy and dead by the time the person ever gets them, which is why we have a flower shop and food inside the Pentagon, just FYI. So what happened is they were wildly successful, and they paved the way for 4 more teams to come after them and do network defense. Also to do no-notice penetration testing of networks. And it's transformative. When they come in, we have a list of things that we want them to accomplish. So we want them to be able to go between nerd speak and human speak, right? So they can explain something highly technical to a person who isn't highly technical. We have them in a flat organizational structure, which they come on the first day and they're looking at us like they're waiting for orders. And then we say, no, you're gonna run at this problem, and they run at the problem. And they come back with tremendous results because they know what it's like to be out in theater, or they work with the people who go out in theater, and then they're able to come to the table with that knowledge. We have sent them out to work with actual users that they're building a technology for, which is also no small thing. It's something we take for granted in the private sector, but to actually go put something that they have a prototype for in the hands of the person who's actually going to use it and get that critical feedback and make real-time adjustments is the difference between them getting that in 2 to 3 months versus 1 to 6 years, right? So I have to say, when they leave, they are more confident, they are stronger leaders because they know how to speak up and defend the technology that they're working on and why they're taking this approach to the problem set. And they take that back with them when they go back into their commands. And they do it over and over and over again. Every time we bring them to the table and put the problem set on the table for them, they're learning how to attack a problem very quickly. And from people who do it in the private sector and build products successfully in the private sector, they are learning those best practices. And it's from the people who come to Defense Digital Service who know what those look like and introduce things to them they've never seen before. The Army doesn't train product managers. The Army doesn't train designers. And we are trying to do a better job retaining our talent so they do become senior engineers. Right now that's a challenge for us, and so DDS is filling that gap. But the growth that we've seen, and I hope you are pleased with the results of getting actual capabilities out in the field, has been pretty tremendous, and it's only been about 2 years that we've been doing this program.
I give a sense of scale on this too. So, Nicole mentioned going from a year and a half to field the capability down to maybe 3 months, 3-4 months, and taking this and testing it with users. And we're talking about users who might be in a war zone somewhere, so that's no small task. We're also talking about orders of magnitude in terms of spending, in terms of costs, right? So the Department of Defense, just as we talked about the first example, the counter drone problem, had spent about $700 million trying to research how to solve this problem that they were having in war zones. And what that produced for them was a broad spectrum signal jammer and a net gun, like literally a gun that shoots nets out of it, catches a drone.
They're giant nets.
It's really amazing.
Big nets.
Really big nets.
The biggest nets. And by contrast, we brought in a team of extremely technical soldiers. We just empowered them. We didn't necessarily teach them anything. They had the talent already. They had the skills. We brought them in. We gave them, MacBooks and a creative space to work in and the latitude to solve a problem. And in 3 months, they had prototyped a solution that cost us about $12,000. We were literally soldering the pieces in our office in the Pentagon.
We're not supposed to talk about that.
Yeah, the fire marshal, we'll talk about that before.
So for $10,000, we're able to get something, $12,000, we're able to get something out to the field. That's a significant impact just right there. So I think it's important to think about the Department of Defense is, as Nicole said, really good at spending money. It's really good at building teams and getting to numbers. What we're not necessarily good at is being solutions driven, and that's really what the goal of these teams is.
So, and Claire, I think it's helpful for you to speak to Tatooine and what the progress of these teams has meant to expanding this culture across the command.
I mean, I think one of the beautiful things that happens when soldiers have an opportunity to come in and work with our team is not only is the spark lit, but it's like a DNA imprint. Chris Lynch, our director, talks a lot about imprinting our DNA to force a cultural change. Nicole sort of mentioned it before. So when they go back out into the force, they start telling their friends and their colleagues about the work they got to do with us, and everyone gets excited. And so there's never-ending demand to come and do projects with our team. But we are headquartered in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. A lot of Army Cyber is headquartered in Augusta, Georgia, and so we decided that if we were going to continue this partnership, we would also have a space in Augusta, Georgia. So we are now built. If you haven't noticed by now, our team is Star Wars centric. That's the universe that we like. None of the others. They're fine, Star Trek might be a thing, or Marvel Universe. But our universe is Star Wars.
We're very inclusive.
And so we are building a location that basically has the DNA imprint of the space we've built, which is a startup in the Pentagon in Augusta, Georgia, to continue working on these types of problems. Patrick sort of mentioned this, the magnitude of impact. So we are very selective about the kind of projects that we select to work on. There is no shortage of people asking us to come do things that they think are very important, especially if the word AI is included or a dashboard. But we are pointedly focused on working on problems that are either termed hard or impossible. The department has not managed to fix for a variety of reasons, and that have a magnitude of an order of impact on the actual mission set of the department. And so that's what Tatooine will build. We're building basically a startup environment. It's going to be in a private office space, unclassified space, to support teams in Augusta, Georgia, that can be from Army or other services to work on these types of problems. Our team will vet them, and we will continue to do the kind of work that we're doing in the Pentagon now. It's just going to be in a remote location.
Thanks, Claire. Hey, a couple of just points for me to clarify. So one, the facility that Claire's talking about is the new Nathan Deal Center for Cyber Innovation in Augusta, Georgia. If you haven't been to downtown Augusta lately, I would recommend you find time to go down there. Great partnership between Augusta University and the state of Georgia to build a cutting-edge facility right on the Savannah River down there. That's pretty neat. I did want to go back to the point about DDS and them being very inclusive. They are very inclusive as long as it relates to Star Wars. Okay? I did want to clarify that because I think it's important. Hey, all joking aside, you know, when we talk about technology, obviously talent is very, very important. One of the things that Nicole has worked on is talent management, really for Army Cyber. And so, Nicole, if you could address really, you know, how talent management and modernization efforts of Army Cyber are complementary or will be complementary in the future to Army Futures Command.
Sure. So I think the biggest lesson that we've learned is the magic that happens when you take people from the private sector and you partner them with members in the military who are incredibly technical as well. And so I think Austin is the perfect opportunity to merge those two worlds because you already have a dense population of technical expertise and talent here. The challenge will be bringing them into the same mesh fabric, right? And taking advantage of the universities that are here that are focusing on computer science or focusing on cyber and engaging students who haven't yet graduated and primarily to get them excited about the mission and to make them the ambassadors for coming and doing this work. And, you know, the concept of Army Futures Command is so fantastic. I think there's a really spectacular opportunity to build what we have built as part of build on top of that versus bringing that in after the fact, right? And trying to lay this on top of a more traditional approach to military, which I believe is the goal. But I think it's just that getting people from the tech sector engaged right out of the gate. And finding those really talented people in uniform to be on these lean teams and become a brain trust. I always call it we need to have a mothership or a hive, right? We try to spread the wealth, spread the talent across the globe, literally. And really what we need to do is have a hive of them in one place. We send them out. This is what we do with our teams. We send them out on sprints. And they go out and they talk to the people who are having the problem, and then they come back to the mothership, and then you have all these minds attacking the problem who have a variety of different experiences to bring to the table.
Thanks, Nicole. Hey, I'd like to start taking questions from the audience. Just a couple of points for me, you know, having both participated in and being able to observe this process is, you know, so the team highlighted DDS has offices in the Pentagon, and now we have a platform down in Augusta, Georgia. And for me, it's always been pretty amazing when I visit and the teams work in a project. And I think for all of you that are involved in the technology sector, you already know this. But you know what these things really have become is a talent magnet. All right, and so there'll be a problem, and you know, DDS will reach out to the Army and say, hey, we're looking for, you know, the following sort of skill sets to work this problem. You know, they will reach out to the private sector or the academic environment, and we'll kind of get, you know, on paper a team of 5 or 10 people that are going to work this. And if you let that grow for a couple of weeks, and then you go to either one of those offices, you'll walk in there and you'll see 10 or 15 people that had no connection to that kind of initial team, that you honestly don't know who they work for, you know, or why exactly, you know, they're in that space trying to solve the problem, other than it's an incredibly interesting problem and it's a great environment. And so, you know, in Army Cyber, our ability to participate in that environment in the Pentagon or down in Tatooine, down in Augusta, has really been significant. You know, and when I look at where, you know, Army Futures Command is trying to go, you know, Army Futures Command is trying to kind of take that and move it to a much larger scale. And from the Army standpoint, we're really excited about that in the future.
I think it's important just to highlight the reason we're building a space in Augusta is because Army's Cyber Command will be headquartered there by next year, for those of you who aren't aware of that. So that's why we're putting a lot of resources down there.
Yeah, we just built we have physically built a brand new headquarters there in Augusta, and in the summer of 2020, the 3-star command will move down to Augusta. So I'd like to go ahead and take any questions. Yes, sir.
My name is Chair Harper. Thank you. My name is Chair Harper. I'm tackling the same problem you guys are too.
It's working.
Yeah, okay.
Really
Forward to us and put that.
Okay.
So I'm tackling the same problem you guys are across the board. So I'm a director of technology, strategy, and innovation.
Okay.
So we're tackling all of our problems. I think one of the biggest benefits, you know, soliciting as well, is you guys, your team will actually come on our side and have a stint in our corporations. And because with the technology background, military background, or DOD as a central community, that would be a great way to really inject that and your expertise. Have you guys ever thought about something like that?
Are you offering us jobs right now? Is that
No,
what's happening?
I want you to stay in your company to help support
Yeah.
us to give you better products.
No, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. I think that's a great thing to highlight right now. Is it is very difficult for people from the outside to actually get at the table where the problems are being discussed, to come up with the right solutions to the problems. And that is another area where we're trying to, on the policy side, how do we break down those barriers? Because I think there's great technologies out there that are available already, but there's no communication, right? It's a challenge.
We might not do it. We might not do it in an official, as like an entire team coming to embed. But I think part of our business model actually is that. I mean, not only are the folks who are coming from private industry leveraging the relationships and the knowledge they had before, but oftentimes there are vendors involved in any process, any project that we come into. A lot of the projects that we manage already had a vendor involved at the table. And part of the frustration on the vendor side has often been they didn't have folks who had the technical capability to break it down to them, because the stakeholder somehow magically is not technical, doesn't understand the ask, doesn't even understand what the product is. And so we do some of that, a lot of that actually, when we're engaging with any project where a vendor is involved, where our team comes in and helps the vendor to understand what the need is, what the ask is, what it is that they need to deliver, what the Army is actually looking for, or the Air Force or any other team that we're working for. And then in some instances, we actually help to find the vendor. Right? So if we recognize that there is a need for contract support because there are only so many bodies to go around, we actually help find the vendor, we help to vet them, we help to identify what the needs are and make sure that we're bringing the right people in place.
I'd like to highlight 2 things just real quick on that that we haven't covered. You know, one is that one of the other things that our team has gotten better and better at is navigating traditional government hiring authorities. And one of the things just culturally about the government is it is very much, you know, the civil service model is very much still oriented around the idea that you come in at, you know, at a lower pay scale, at a more junior position, early in your career, and you work your way up through the ranks, right? You get promoted every couple of years, and eventually, you know, you become a branch chief and then a division chief and yada yada, right? We find that, especially in the tech sector, people don't work that way anymore, right? When was, you know, I would imagine that most of you have not or do not intend to pursue a single career at a single company for 25 plus years. And so in the tech sector especially, people go, they bounce between jobs. They go someplace 2 to 4 years, and they bounce to the next thing. And we want to make the federal government more open to a revolving door of sorts in that way, so that we can have a better exchange between the tech sector best practices and the federal government. And the second piece, which Claire started to touch on too, is that for a lot of our projects, we're a fairly small team. It makes the most sense for us to actually hire in software development firms to help augment our team and help get the work done. And we leverage creative contracting authorities as well that the government has, where it doesn't take us a year to award a contract, and we can run a competition a little bit differently, where we can actually assess the technical competency of a vendor, and we can also make it a much more approachable process to bid on something. So thinking as a former entrepreneur, the thought of bidding on a government contract is incredibly intimidating, right? And so we look for ways where we can make it easier to attract non-traditional, companies that don't traditionally do business with the federal government, to come and participate and be a part of that process.
I just kind of want
It's working.
caveat on some of the things that we just discussed, and I think you bring up a good point. When the government is in need of a requirement, the contract is opened up and they solicit for that help. But what about to be able to move quickly and rapidly in a tech environment? There might be a time when private sector would need to know about what it is that you might be trying to solve before it gets to a point of needing a contract to let everybody else know, hey, we're out here and we're having a problem. Where is that piece at? Where are we in just saying, hey, here are the issues, and I understand there's probably all sorts of security implementations about saying, here's an issue we have and we're looking to solve it, but how can we do better at that before we have to determine we need a contract? Because that would lessen the time necessary for private sector to be able to react to the issue.
Sure.
Well, I think a lot of what we do on our team too is, there are a lot of assumptions about what the need is. And one of the things that our team does really well and helps the federal government and our partners to figure out across all the teams under our umbrella is identifying what the actual problem set is and what's the best way to tackle it. I think until that becomes an actual ingrained model in the federal government, it'll be really difficult to actually say, these are all the problem sets we need to solve. If we're talking on the unclass side, right? So let's just forget the classified side, we're talking on the unclass side. Because what we've seen now is you actually do have a bunch of solicitations out there to solve a problem that actually doesn't exist, or actually won't solve whatever the problem is people think is happening. And so I think that ability comes with working with teams like ours, and there are a bunch of other types of startup teams in the federal government right now that are sort of working on helping the federal government, and if we're specifically talking about the Department of Defense, actually identify what is the problem you need to solve, and then going out and finding. I think if we go the list route, it's a little bit dangerous, because then you have everyone coming up with fanciful ideas about what they need. Like, we can tell any story about any person. We have an open door policy in our office. You walk in, it looks nothing like any office in the Pentagon. There's not a cubicle, there's nothing. There's a poster that may or may not be offensive to folks that basically tells you to get work done quickly. But people come in and are like, hey, we got this problem. We think we need machine learning. And then we go out and we do a discovery sprint and we find out, no, what you really need is to help people learn how to use Excel better. Right? Or maybe you shouldn't use Excel to manage that data set because, I don't know, many reasons. So I think before we get to that point, we need to get a better system in place for helping people to actually identify where their needs are. And that's the thing we bring to the table that is not status quo in the federal government.
I want to also tell a short story related to this. So this is a story about getting a security clearance. It takes 2 years right now. I don't know if you know that, but it takes 2 years, about 18 months of which your file is sitting on a shelf in a queue before the investigator picks it up, and then there's a lot of shoe leather processes where somebody goes out in the field and actually interviews all these people and try to get a sense of your background. This is after you filled out the 120-page background investigation form, by the way. And then once those interviews are complete, those files literally go to a mine in western Pennsylvania, Boyers, Pennsylvania. You can Google this; it's a real thing. And there's a lot of great dedicated civil servants there whose job it is to go through and compile those investigation notes and log everything. And then from there, it gets sent to an office in DC, sometimes literally by semi-truck, by the way, where a decision is made on whether you get a security clearance. The whole process takes about 2 years end to end. That's another significant barrier that people don't often think about when you think about getting small companies to, attracting small companies that don't traditionally do business with the government. If I'm running a government procurement, a position that I've been in the past, and I need somebody with a certain level of clearance, it's a hell of a lot easier for me to go to the companies we traditionally do business with, who are great at building certain things, but may not be the best at building software, and just contract with them because they have clear people, right? And so one of the projects that I'm actually leading right now is going to get that background investigation time down from 2 years to about 2 weeks.
Patrick's gonna fix it.
Thank you, Patrick.
We're gonna try. Let's manage expectations here. We're taking that problem on, right?
I've got it. I'll give you.
You
So-
can take selfies with them too.
When we're done.
So there are problems around that as well, right? We have to be able to get lower the barrier to entry for this brain trust of people that we have in the tech sector in this country, and actually not just encourage them through opportunities like this and through sort of our continued engagement with the tech sector, but also just making the traditional process easier, making it easier to get a contract, making it easier to get a background check. All of these things.
Hacking
are
all
parts
the
of it.
things.
I would
That's
say
the
though
bureaucracy
that
hacking.
the background check thing is not just unique to folks in the private industry. I mean, the Army,
We
right
all go
now,
through
all
it.
the branches of the military, anyone who works in the federal government who requires a clearance is going through the same thing, where you might attract really great talent, and then they get to sit for months on end waiting for clearance just to go do the thing that they were recruited to do. And that's also problematic, so.
We're also working on that too, expediting that timeline.
Yeah, so if we can move on here,
Yeah.
I will highlight something that Chris has told me before, is that, get your clearance when you're young before you've done all the bad stuff in life. Okay, is a method to go about doing this. But in all seriousness, an opportunity to work with us, when you're relatively new in your career, does provide you an opportunity to kind of continue to come and go into the space. So, sir, your question?
Yeah, so sir, Mike Hauser from Salesforce, and my question's around talent management and I guess the front end of the talent management piece is acquiring the talent.
Right on.
And currently, the Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines use the ASVAB,
Right.
which was built in '68,
Yeah.
which went through a couple of revisions, and I think the latest was 2004. So are you actively right now working with them, because your pool of who's who in the zoo, so to speak, would be you'd have better clarity and the type of talent we need to attract to do these technical jobs. So is that something you're currently working on, or is that something that's on the roadmap?
So Patrick and I will have different answers to this question. We're working different sides of the problem, but so we're slowly. I think Air Force is probably a little bit ahead on this. Is changing how we assess people in the first place, right? So it's aptitude now versus existing knowledge, right? Like we all know that not everybody starts programming when they're 7 years old, but they may have an incredible aptitude for picking it up quickly given the opportunity. So it takes, like everything else, Army Research Institute is trying to tackle this problem, coming up with the best assessment, and then they have to test the results over a few years in order to validate it so that they can then implement it. So yes, I would say there is a huge push and a huge acknowledgement that we're probably not using the right methods for assessing who is a good fit for the space. Would you guys have other perspectives on this too?
I'll give you, just a quick anecdote on describing the status quo with this problem. Just last week I was in San Diego for a meeting with all of the service recruiting commands, the people who administer that ASVAB test actually. And we talked to the command, which shall remain nameless, that actually administers it, and they were trying to move to allowing applicants for military service, for enlisted military service, to use a calculator while they're taking the math portions of the ASVAB. And the response in the room was, oh, well, we've explored that. It's going to take us 10 years to figure out how to re-engineer the test to support using a calculator. So like, that's the level we're dealing with on some of this. But in all seriousness, and Nicole is right, I think the Air Force is a little ahead on this. They administer what they call a cyber test for a lot of people, I think for everybody actually as they enlist. Yeah. With the goal being of identifying people who maybe wouldn't necessarily want to join a cyber branch, but who might be talented, might have the aptitude for those types of skill sets, and they sort of suggest that they consider that. And I know the Army is looking at similar things. So there's everything from sort of that intake process to the mechanics of how we assign talent once they've joined. There's a lot of challenges there, and there are people trying to attack this problem, but
and we course correct you. Well, we find people who are definitely in the wrong area, and we could definitely leverage them better in Army Cyber.
Well,
we
Army
facilitate
Cyber
that process.
In a little on the ground. So one of the projects I manage is called Digital JoJo. It's the training pipeline for the 17 Charlie population, which is the largest workforce for the for Army Cyber.
So 17 Charlie is our cyber military occupation.
Yeah, and so they all come in based on the ASVAB, right? They come in based on their ASVAB score. You get a certain score, you get to choose Army Cyber, they show up. And Nicole, everyone has mentioned, like, that is not a good indicator of if you can actually do the cybers, right? If you can computer good, as we say in our team. So, but on the ground, there are a bunch of folks that recognize that. And so while ARI is doing their long-term research, there are folks on the ground right now that are implementing things to try to mitigate that. So for instance, like SOHOM actually is doing an aptitude test and working with some folks at West Point and folks at University of Maryland to implement a test right now where they're learning how to identify the aptitude. For our course, we're actually building in as well a beta test of an aptitude portion. So it's sort of after the fact the soldier's already here, but we're testing out to see if there are things that we can look for beyond the ASVAB to determine if soldiers should show up. So the long process, this is part of how we hack things, right? Like, so that ARI process is a scientific process, very rigid, will take forever, and God knows if it'll work by the time it's done. While that's happening on the ground, though, the cyber school under Army Cyber is working on something actively to try to mitigate that. So at some point, I think we'll start to see some breaks there because people on the ground actually recognize this is an issue as well and are doing things actively to work on it while the long process is going on.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
So, quick question for Patrick. When we were talking about counter UAS, honestly, we do a lot of counter UAS space. Are you also working with program offices like PUC ran their requirements and saying, okay, now you want to take this $12,000 kit that you developed, productize it for the military, requires standard 800G, 461C, harden it, and then you turn it into a $75,000, $100,000 product. So are you guys working that trade space with the industry?
I'll just touch on it just real quick. So DDS is not designed as a program office. We don't own anything long term. So one of the key components as we get started with any new project, whether it's counter UAS, whether it's a pure software project, is identifying the partner command or the ultimate PMO that's the program management office that this is going to wind up in. Sometimes that's pretty challenging. I won't say that we've gotten it right every single time, but a lot of sort of the goal of that is making sure that not only are we developing a technology or capability, but we are sort of along the way teaching that PMO how to fish, so to speak, right? Well, and that's a lot of the challenge that we run into is that we take such a different approach from most of the rest of the government in how we approach these problem sets that we really have to work and embed with the commands, the agencies, the PMOs that we are handing this off to early so that they know how to maintain this thing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, we're government employees and military members developing this technology. We're not in it for the IP. We don't care about any of that. We actually expect that we're going to hand it off to a vendor who's going to sell it back to us at some point, and we're fine with that.
And so in this case in particular, you know, this handed off to Army Cyber, then Army Cyber will hand that off to a PM. But the goal, of course, is not losing our ability to innovate at the pace that's required, you know, to keep up with the capability. And so that's really kind of the end goal of what we're moving there.
And we're keeping part of the team that actually built the initial prototype is still engaged in that transition process.
Yeah,
so there's no loss of.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is, so clearly our niche from an Army Cyber standpoint, you know, isn't in hardware manufacturing, right? Right, but it may be in, you know, it may be in software modification in order to keep up with whatever threat is. And so that's what we're, you know, the initial piece of this is the whole thing, right? So we're soldering boxes together and working that piece of it. And ultimately what we want to do is work ourselves out of that business while maintaining the linkage there that allows us to be agile enough to keep up with the threat. Hey ma'am, yes please. This is going to be the last question. In the back please ma'am.
So how do you facilitate respect and communication in an environment where the older you are and the longer you've been in service, the more authority you have? And then on the flip side, you have young, talented inventors who obviously haven't had a time in service, haven't had a long time in their careers, but they have fresh, hot ideas. How do you facilitate, say, like the design process where you have these young people saying, like, hey, maybe the thing you initially suggested doesn't work. Maybe that isn't going to actually solve the problem. And then you have like these old guys that are
That's 2 and 3 stars only.
Yeah. 2 and 3 stars only.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying, and it is super important, and that's part of why we took them out of that environment and put them into a flatter organizational environment so that we build trust more quickly. Rank goes away. I'm sure you've noticed, sometimes to your dismay, when you come visit the teams, they relax and they have more candid conversations with leadership, and we coach them through that, but we also coach leaders to changing their perspective a little bit when it comes to these types of ideas and how you don't send them up the chain of command because it gets diluted, right? It should come from the source. The people who are coming up with the ideas and a prototype and a potential solution need to be able to go and defend it to the people who have to make a decision about whether to move forward on that thing. So I think that it is having those conversations on both sides to facilitate a more productive approach to these types of problems.
A simple thing that we do with the military members who join the team is we ask them not to wear uniform, to just wear civilian clothes in the office, because they are often of like mixed ranks. It's usually lieutenants, captains, and majors, and the first like week or so they'll be calling each other sir and ma'am, and it's a little weird. And so to get that flat organizational structure of people who might be a different rank, that's one of the just small tactics that we use.
So we also want to balance the fact that they've signed up to be in the military, and there are certain aspects of that culture that need to be maintained. And you do earn certain things by doing different jobs, having different roles. So it's a delicate balance. I don't want to say, I don't think it's right to swing one way or the other. So we're trying to find what that is.
I think also once they have the opportunity to work in the space and the folks who are not in our space have an opportunity to interact with that and see how it works, it starts to become more comfortable for them, right? So in a normal construct, yes, if you're younger and you're new and you're junior, then you don't get to have a decision point. But when people see those soldiers working with us and see the results of the work with us, when they return back to their environment, there's a level of respect for the expertise that they build, and that's part of the culture shift that Nicole mentioned before. It's a long game, right? It's one at a time, team at a time, but eventually that will be the thing that takes over the culture and the thinking around how we work in technology, on how we work on technology projects, and who we actually bring to the table as experts based on what they know and what they're bringing to the table versus how long they've been in the Army or what rank they are.
Okay, thanks. Hey, so you highlighted kind of the number one problem, right? So it's about culture, Okay, and how do you establish the right culture in your organization that maximizes the genius that your members bring to solving a problem? Okay, and that's what really kind of started all this, and how we're attempting to get after it, and it acts as a model for us that for me, you know, I try and bring to other parts of my organization, and that I think is very, very important. Hey, we're out of time. You know, I really appreciate everybody's participation today. You know, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't issue kind of a call for help and an advertisement. So because I'm one of the old people, you know, my staff wrote out, hey sir, you need to tell people that there's, you know, job opportunities in both civilian and military at Army Cyber Command, and then they typed out the address for me, the IP address. But if you can't find Army Cyber Command on the internet, you're probably not the right person. I'm just going to say that, okay? There's also opportunities in the Defense Digital Service. Okay, again, if you can't, you know, find, you know, dds.mil on the internet, you're probably not the right person either. But again, you know, there are opportunities to come into this space, okay, and to get involved in the national security of the United States of America and the security of our key allies and partners across the world. Okay, it's a noble profession, and we invite you to do that. Finally, I want to thank Capital Factory, South by Southwest, Futures Command, General Murray, General Wesley, for allowing us to be here today, and I hope to see all of you in some capacity in the future. Thanks so much.